Howdy, folks. Starting off Unit 7 here today, and Unit 7 is going to be a continuation of this idea of integrating choice and style of an author within an argument, how to use those two things to improve an argument's efficacy. So the two specific goals we're going to work on today, you can see here are unit goals, but the specific ones we're going to look at today is take a look at how maybe rhetorical situation might affect an introduction, and then take a look at how an author is choosing style and choosing what to add and what not to add to create emphasis and meaning. So specifically, we're looking at introductions today, right? So choice in the beginning of our essays in our writing can sometimes be the most important choices we make, right? It's the first thing that an author reads. A lot of teachers describe this as you got to hook in your reader, you got to give them something that they're going to see. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that. So a good introduction may present their thesis and orient and engage their reader by doing some of the following things. Obviously, it's not going to do all of these all the time. You can add in meaningful quotations. Famous quotations are always a great way to start, as long as they're relevant, as long as they're building on a way for you to really kind of get to your argument, right? We can also build in intriguing statements, something that someone maybe hasn't heard before, or said in a way that isn't familiar with people, right? We got to hook people in with something interesting. We can use language to do that. We can build in some contextualizations. So basically bringing our reader to the table and saying like, hey, here's my topic and here's kind of how I'm going to approach that. And this doesn't necessarily need to be in those exact terms. You don't need to say, dear reader, I'm writing this topic about race cars and why race cars are cool, right? We can do that much more interesting, in a much more interesting way. Anecdotes, short little stories are great ways to hook readers in and get people to think about the topic that you're writing about without directly telling them. I'll give you an example of one here in a second. We can build in questions. Rhetorical questions are great. They are overused. I'm going to tell you that now as an English teacher. I see a whole bunch of people like writing a question and then going out to answer it, and it's elementary. It's not a bad thing, but it's also not an interesting thing unless it's done really, really well. I'll give you an example, again, of a well-done question in just a second. We can use statistics and data, so bringing up things that someone may not know or something that may not startle or that may startle someone. So these might tie in with intriguing statements. And then the last time is scenarios. So you can kind of put your reader into a situation where like, hey, imagine that this is happening. And here's what we're going to do about it. So let's take a look at a well-done example. So this is an essay called I Want a Wife, written in 1990 by author Judy Brady. I'm just going to read the first little bit to you. I belong to that classification of people known as wives. I'm a wife, and not altogether incidentally, I am a mother. So right here, we start with a contextualization. We know kind of what this essay is going to be about. We know where she's coming from. She's contextualizing her background, right? And notice some specific things like I am a wife, capital A, capital W. So that kind of implies some meaning there. Like this is a proper noun. This is a thing. And also, it starts to get me interested because I get a little nervous whenever someone says, I belong to that classification of people known as wives. Because whenever I hear someone that says, I belong to the profession of people, the classification known as teachers, like implying that all teachers are the same. And she's here kind of implying that all wives are the same. And I can't quite tell yet, is she going to be like, all wives are great and motherly and encouraging, or is she going to take this in a different direction? So there's some ambiguity here, which I like. All right, so not too long ago, a male friend of mine appeared on the scene fresh from a recent divorce. He had one child who is, of course, with his ex-wife. He's looking for another wife. Anecdote, right? This short little story takes 2 sentences, 3 sentences, and builds in another scenario, right? Now she's introduced a divorced friend. She has some tongue-in-cheek, like sarcasm here. He had one child who is, of course, with the ex-wife, setting up this idea of kind of gender norms and stereotypes. Of course the kid is with the ex-wife. Why in the world would a child be with the husband or the father, right? We can see where she's going without her directly telling us. It's a much more intriguing way to build this introduction by adding this anecdote. And then here's a good use of a question. And as I thought about him while I was ironing, some good irony there, one evening, it suddenly occurred to me that I too would like to have a wife. Now, why do I want a wife? That's a good question. It's a good rhetorical question that she goes on to answer, but she also uses it as a conceit, right? Think about her situation. Think about her rhetorical situation. It's 1990s, 30 years in the past. She is a heterosexual married female who wants a wife, right? That's an interesting question, right? How many wives would say, hey, I want a wife? That's like me saying, hey, I want a husband. In addition to my already lovely and beautiful wife. There's an interesting question, right? She didn't just say, what's the thing with gender stereotypes, or why are gender stereotypes so harmful in society today? She took it in a different direction. So that's a good question. And then she goes into a bunch of different scenarios. So I would like to go back to school so I can become economically independent, support myself, and if need be, support those dependent upon me. I want a wife who will work and send me to school. I want a wife who will take care of the children. And I want a wife to keep track of the children's doctor's appointments, right? She gives all these different scenarios in this really cool, repetitive style, right? She keeps repeating that phrase to build emphasis, to like hit someone over the head, saying like, here are all the things that a wife does, but also is expected to do in the 1990s, right? This is very much emphasizing the stereotypical view of housewives, which she has identified herself as one, right? So she is both kind of glorifying this position, giving credit to those wives for doing all these like things that probably aren't thanked enough, but also kind of pushing against this, saying like, why is it the wives who have to be doing this? There's, a lot of different ways that these responsibilities could play out. And that's brought up with this anecdote here really subtly. So if I were to give you a question of like, how does the opening paragraph set the tone for the entire essay? That's something that I would expect you to be able to do by analyzing the introduction and examining an author's choice, right? So the things that pop out to me is I see that she's being sarcastic and humorous in this, right? She's talking about, while I was ironing, this thought came into my head, very stereotypical trope of an action for a housewife. And then she kind of has this cyclical nature, like, I want to go back to school so I can support those who support me, like not truly recognizing that you're also being supported, right? If your wife is taking care of everything else so you can work or so you can go back to school or whatever, right? That's another form of support. So that sarcasm is also mixed with kind of the realism and annoyance maybe of these stereotypes that she brings out really, really clearly. So just as a wrap up, remember, effective rhetoric, effective writing and argument is really a combination of those two things: of situation, what is the situation of this author, what's the situation of the world, and the choices that that author makes. And so our goals in reading and writing is to examine and use things to add emphasis and meaningful comparison, to build analytical introductions or to analyze introductions. Remember, always just boil it down to, okay, how is someone writing this? Why are they doing it the way that they do? All right. Good luck, folks.